I'm David Bank, and from Impact Alpha, this is an Agents of Impact podcast.
But when a country decides that these people can be contributors, everything unlocks and the economy prospers.
That's John Kluge of the Refugee Investment Network. John and his co-founder and wife, Christine Mahoney, joined me to discuss their new book, Banking on Belonging: Why Investing in Refugee Entrepreneurs Benefits Everyone. At a time when more than 120 million people worldwide have been forcibly displaced, the highest level in history, the book makes the case for supportive policies and welcoming environments that can deliver gains for both migrants and host countries. John and Christine bust a few myths along the way and spotlight the enormous economic opportunities in refugee entrepreneurship. Impact capital, they say, may advance the migration conversation where advocacy has fallen short. I think you'll enjoy our conversation. Christine and John, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks, David. Great to be here.
Congratulations on the new book, Banking on Belonging: Why Investing in Refugee Entrepreneurs Benefits Everyone. I know, you guys, as well as Impact Alpha, we love the solutions, but let's set up the problem. You have identified what unfortunately is a growth market, which is people on the move, migration, immigration, emigration, refugees, of course, displacement. This is a much bigger phenomena than most people realize. So, Christine, maybe just lay the groundwork. What are we talking about here?
Sure. I mean, you're exactly right. This is one of the biggest challenges facing us today. We have over 120 million people who have been forced to flee from their homes due to violence and war. This is actually the highest level of human displacement in history. And so, as you also note, it's not going away, right? The global refugee crisis is ballooning, and all expectations are these numbers are going to continue to grow. And at the time that this problem is becoming massively large, we see governments retreating from helping these families. We see governments slashing resettlement programs like we've seen in the United States. We've seen cuts into international humanitarian aid. And so that's why we wrote this book. We have a new approach, one that uses impact investing and business to be a lever of change and incorporating these refugees into economies and building economies of belonging.
Well, you talk about refugee entrepreneurs. I'm struck because, folks maybe think, sort of huddled masses yearning to breathe free, but in many cases, these are very accomplished, educated professionals with all kinds of skills. There's a real talent pool here and a kind of entrepreneurial opportunity. So maybe bust some myths maybe about refugees and migrants.
Totally. Great point, David. I think, number one, I think our book makes a pretty compelling case. We've got a lot of evidence for this now, which we'll definitely unpack in our chat. But first, refugees tend to make economies stronger. That's just fact number one. They create jobs, they bring tax revenue. The refugee resettlement program just here in the United States, for example, has brought in almost 500 billion in tax contributions just over the last 15 years. Then you think about, that story.
Let me sorry to interrupt, but let me just pause on that. Instead of being a burden and a drain on the budget and the economy, you're saying they're a net positive. If that's the case, let's underline that.
100%. And because refugees are a net positive, and here's the catch, when communities and nations welcome them and develop what we would call the conditions of belonging and economic-based integration, that allows people to bank, right? Access a bank account, transact, to have the freedom to move, to be able to start their business, to take on investment or a loan, and to get gainful employment, like these basic things. Without those, it is more complicated. But when a country decides that these people can be contributors, everything unlocks and the economy prospers.
So Impact Alpha has been tracking along with the Refugee Investment Network, I think for pushing 10 years now. And you've been working on this challenge for even longer than that. Maybe give us the origin story of the work.
Sure. I was doing fieldwork for my last book, which was called Failure and Hope, and I was researching human rights-based advocacy approaches all over the world. And I was thinking if I found some success stories, we could learn from those and deploy those same advocacy strategies in other places. And what I found was rather heartbreaking. Worldwide, human rights-based advocacy was just not moving the needle. People were stuck in refugee camps for their entire lives. Their children were born and raised in refugee camps. No ability to work, no ability to start a business, no ability to really kind of manifest their dreams. And it was really after years of that work that I had this aha. It's really when impact investing was coming into its own, and I saw this connection point. And I saw entrepreneurs in refugee camps all over the place, right? People starting little hairdressing shops or little education supply shops, people starting restaurants. And so, when people run for their lives, they may not run with their material possessions or their documents, but they take their business acumen with them and they start again.
And so that sort of the aha moment, as you say, was that there's a business opportunity here. If there's a business opportunity and people can make money, it often gets the attention of policymakers, maybe in a way that human rights advocacy might not. Is that what you're saying?
Exactly right. And because when people are not given the chance to kind of build their businesses or become gainfully employed, they're forced into aid dependence. And so when they're forced into aid dependence, then that leads to conflicts with like local governments, local communities. And so it's this vicious cycle. And it's because of man-made policies, we're making the situation worse. And so there was this real aha that we can shift our decisions and we can shift our policy and actually unlock the opportunity for these new members of our communities to become the entrepreneurs and employees we know they can be.
John, you mentioned that when this policy environment or when the reception is positive, it can be a positive, obviously for the refugees, but also for the host countries. And we hear so much about the conflict and the barriers that are put up, the walls in some cases, literally. Are there cases where it's been done well? It's cases where host countries have actually embraced the opportunity.
There are, David, and in our book we take a page out of Sylvia Earle, the great oceanographer's work, and we talk about hope spots, right? And a hope spot is for us in this context, it's where this is working. Where are people, companies, governments, entrepreneurs, and investors working together to build these economies of belonging? So what does that look like? The United States, until this last year, for example, has been a really great model for that. For over 3 decades, we have been resettling millions of refugees from around the world, really dating back to the late 1970s. Really when this program accelerated. And I am in some ways a product of a welcoming environment. My dad predates this work. He was not a refugee, but he was certainly an immigrant who was fleeing poverty. And had he stayed in Germany in the 30s, things would have turned out very differently for him. But his success is predicated on the fact that someone was willing to take a bet on his potential future. So when you think about some of the big blue chip companies like Intel, founded by Andy Grove, Google with Sergey Brin, WhatsApp with Jan Koum, PayPal with Max Levchin, none of those companies would exist if this country didn't have a pathway for people to belong. And so that's kind of the context of what the US is all about. But we have hundreds of thousands of small business and medium-sized business entrepreneurs who are not household names, but are contributors to their economies, to their cities, their states. And that's largely because of the enabling environment and the support that they have access to here. So the International Rescue Committee, I don't know if you know this, has its own community development financial institution called the Center for Economic Opportunity. They provide small business loans, business training support. They even do auto loans to new Americans, as well as American citizens who might not otherwise qualify for those kinds of things, because on the balance sheet, on their credit report, they don't match traditional credit evaluation metrics. But they are superb customers. And that's what CDFIs like the IRCs have found. And now they're in the hundreds of thousands here.
Just to press one layer deeper, immigrants who come seeking a better life is one use case. Folks displaced by war or famine or, I suppose, climate change and leaving involuntarily, it might be a different case? Is there a sort of, I don't know, academic literature or just a knowledge about sort of how different kinds of sort of migrating populations behave and perform, I guess?
Well, we do know that refugees have often faced incredible hardship and they are incredibly resilient. All of the evidence shows that that's one of the reasons they're such incredible entrepreneurs because they have such grit. So the evidence is strong there. We do see a lot of evidence of mixed migration flows as well, people fleeing poverty, but that's segueing in with fleeing violence. But I think the important thing is within the United Nations and our modern definition, a refugee is someone who's fleeing really for their running for their lives. And there is I think, a particular interest among host communities to help support those individuals. We know that they are the most vulnerable. We all know that if we were in that position, we would want someone to be opening the door for us. And so that's what we're seeing around the world. As John mentioned, yes, the United States is a very wealthy country, and we have done a good job of welcoming waves of people over the decades. But what is really interesting is we found that even in medium income countries or even in more impoverished countries, there are some really great models of welcoming people fleeing for their life. And so we did field work in Mexico, which is receiving millions of people fleeing violence in Venezuela, in the Northern Triangle, in Central America. And they built a really incredible program where they resettled people from the southern border of Mexico, where there's not much economic activity going on, into these really bustling cities in the north, where there was tons of job, labor shortages, and help those families get established, get settled, get their children into school, get their families kind of integrated into the normal economy. And 99% of them were stabilized and kind of happily contributing to the economy. And what is interesting there, too, like to our current federal government, is those families were no longer trying to cross the US's southern border because they found a new home that was safe, where they could thrive and their children could thrive.
That's a fascinating sort of myth-busting point. Mexico not as a source of migrants, but as a destination for migrants, and as you say, a country that's actually turning it into a economic positive for their own labor supply situation. Let's keep going. What else is working?
Well, so, just a word on that too. I think we were really surprised, one, by the innovativeness of this program that was being led by the UN Refugee Agency, but how they had thought about what we would call like social infrastructure. It's all the things that allow someone to become a full contributor. So Christine mentioned like making sure that their kids were able to go to the school system, that they were able to access healthcare, that importantly, especially in Mexico, they could access a bank. Because in Mexico, if you don't have a bank account, you cannot participate in the formal economy because most payroll is managed through direct wire transfer. So that's a really, really critical thing.
And if we look too, I mean, another really incredible framework is in the European Union. When Russia started attacking Ukraine, the EU did an unprecedented thing and essentially gave Ukrainian refugees the right to work, which is new. And it's been incredible. Refugees from Ukraine have started businesses at incredibly high rates, creating jobs, creating millions of dollars in tax payments, for example, just in Poland alone. And so that's another, we're seeing these kind of hypothesis tests out there. And when governments become a bit more welcoming and create some policy that's a bit more welcoming, the economic returns happen almost simultaneously.
Okay, so these are the policy environments, but we're also talking about mobilizing private capital. So, what are the sort of investment, not just opportunities, but sort of the investment use cases? Is it really financing entrepreneurs, or are there other kinds of asset classes that folks might be able to get into?
So we think about this as the entire continuum of both the market in terms of the types of companies operating in the space and the capital that they're seeking, and then also the investment stack. So like it's kind of the two pieces of it. So you have, as Christine mentioned early on, these kind of micro entrepreneurs all over the world who are displaced that are starting off their businesses. So micro enterprise and microfinance is what we would say is like the first layer of investment that's happening. So you
And maybe the great evidence on that is Kiva. So Kiva, which many of your listeners might know, is a microfinance platform. They launched something called the World Refugee Fund, and through that, they were targeting microfinance lending to refugees. And they found that they are an incredibly great bet, right? They had super high repayment rates, were super credit worthy, and so that was a big push in many different countries, deploying millions of dollars in capital at the micro level.
But before Kiva launched that in 2016 or 2017, which we were there when they did that. There wasn't a lot of lending even going to micro enterprise. Most microfinance institutions were very skeptical of this. I think we've had previous conversations about that. The perception that refugee borrowers as entrepreneurs would be higher risk or that they might leave at some point, that has been completely dispelled now. Kiva has deployed, millions of dollars into this work, and it has been very effective with repayment rates at well over 96%, which is on par with any other borrower. It's also brought in other lenders like Inkomoko in Africa. They have lent to over 120,000 entrepreneurs. They've deployed at least over, somewhere around $40 million of investment, and that's been very successful. So that's the micro enterprise lane. Then you've got small and medium sized businesses, and this is where we're starting to see kind of marquee impact investors like Acumen get into the space, which is also exciting to see. Acumen has been a long time pioneer of patient capital. And now what they're doing is not really different from what they have done in other contexts, but it is about extending the intention of their investment to make sure that no one is really being left out of their market thesis. And in this case, they're now investing in what they would call conflict affected populations.
So you talked about intention. I think you've also talked about sort of having a refugee lens. What are you hoping that impact investors, that agents of impact, as we call them, are take away from the book?
Well, really, we wanted to first showcase these case studies around the world that this is already happening and it's working, and there's models we can draw on. And then in the concluding chapter, we provide a blueprint for investors and philanthropists and impact capital that want to start moving into this space. And so we see an opportunity for CDFIs to be increasing their refugee focused lending. We see an opportunity for blended finance. We see an opportunity for pay for success type models. And we talk about cases of success in that, like the one in Massachusetts by social finance. There's also opportunities, as John mentioned, as we think about larger investments in companies to incentivize behavior, right? Some people talk about kind of conditional impact investing. So we've seen interesting models in that to incentivize social enterprises to serve kind of the bottom of the pyramid. We also talk about models of we could incentivize serving refugees with products and services aimed at the bottom of the pyramid.
Yeah, it's basically like, thinking about outcomes linked finance or impact linked finance and applying that to this demographic. So this is where that is happening kind of at small and medium sized businesses, but it's also something that we are thinking about for development finance institutions. Because one thing that we know, most refugees are not, in places like the US or in Europe. In fact, most are further south. They're in Africa, they're in Latin America, they're in the Middle East, and in parts of Asia. So the question is, if some of these markets are challenging for institutional or pension fund investors, how do we make sure that they are excited about these options? And that is where the development finance institutions can play a big role. And we've seen that in other areas like gender, for example.
Well, take it back, though, Christine, to the original insight about the sort of shortcomings of advocacy to change the narrative. Is the narrative changing as a result of these private sector, private capital investment opportunities into this burgeoning and, as we said, unfortunately growing market?
I think so, especially overseas. I think there's really strong evidence about what an incredible asset the Ukrainian refugees have been to the communities they've found themselves in. Similar with Syrian refugees in the Middle East. Obviously, in the United States, we're seeing a lot of political kind of polarization and politicization of the question of the benefit of refugees. And so that's why we're working hard to share this book and share the stories and the movement around this.
I think, the only other thing I would add is just that I think there's an increasing sense of agency from the investment and business community. So as we see governments taking a step backwards, it is creating kind of an opening. And the more businesses that are getting involved, even if you look at like something like the Tent Partnership, which is about focusing on employment opportunities for refugees through mostly large multinational companies, there are now over 500 major blue chip companies from all over the world that are hiring refugees. Why are they doing that? Yes, it's absolutely the right thing to do, but it is also just good business sense. These employees are improving the retention rates of these companies. They tend to have extraordinary sense of loyalty and commitment to the companies that take a bet on them, and that improves their cash flow. So if you even took away the kind of the fact that this is the right thing to do, you are still left with a very strong economic argument that this improves the performance at a firm level. And these businesses are getting wise to that. And what we're hoping with this book is that, investors don't get left behind. This is like, we think of that, this is like a pioneer market. Now is the time.
So last question, you're co-authors of this new book. You've been co-founders and partners in the Refugee Investment Network. You're also a married couple. What's it been like building all this together?
Well, it has been. I mean, I think in some ways we've been more efficient because we can discuss any questions that come up all day long. But it's been nice. I'm an academic and John's a practitioner and I'm a scholar and, he's the business guy, I'm the policy guy. So I think we bring kind of a nice set of complementary skill sets and experiences and perspectives.
It is, as I told Christine yesterday, because it is also our 10-year wedding anniversary. She has brought thank you. She's brought profound meaning into our life, and being able to create together and to support our friends from all over the world in this work has been very rewarding for us at a personal level. Doesn't mean that we don't have tense discussions at the dinner table about some of these topics. But it is nice when we can actually put a pen to a page and hopefully support the emergence of new investors in the space.
Well, I hope it makes the field visits more enjoyable, as well as the upcoming book tour. Congratulations to both of you on the new book. We'll be tracking along as we have with the Refugee Investment Network and with all of your work. So, John and Christine, thanks for joining us.
Thanks so much, David.
That's going to do it for this Agents of Impact podcast. Big thanks to Christine and John, to our producer Isaac Silk, to the whole team at Impact Alpha, and to all of you Agents of Impact, with deep gratitude for all that you do.